All right, welcome to the second episode of Whiteboard Wednesdays. In the last episode, we covered some of the considerations for programming strength training for runners, as well as some of the areas of emphasis and some of the challenges that running poses for programming. In this episode, we're going to cover some of the general program guidelines and how to incorporate strength training and running in the same week. Now, before I delve into that stuff, I just wanted to briefly cover some of the challenges that we talked about at the end of the last episode, because that's going to play a major role in terms of how the stuff is laid out throughout the week. And the biggest challenges of running are the impact, well, at least in terms of program design, are the impact and the eccentric loading, because those are going to have a big impact on recovery, as well as they're going to make people prone to overuse of the ankles and the knees. So that's going to come into play in terms of how the stuff is laid out throughout the week. And I also just want to briefly address the fact that none of this that I say today is going to be is intended as a prescription. I'm just trying to cover some general guidelines of program design. I'm not, this isn't meant to be copied and pasted into your own training. So first of all, I want to address beginners and show an example of a more beginner sort of template. And when we're thinking about beginners, we have to think about a few things. Like I covered last time, for beginners and their goals, strength training is going to be primary. That's going to be the most important thing. Running is not going to be so important. And if they're planning on just completing a 5K or a 10K or even a half marathon, and they're not concerned about actually running the entire distance, maybe they're not concerned about running any of it at all, those individuals don't even really need to run. Will that maybe be appropriate at some point down the road? Sure. But at first, it's really not necessary. The focus needs to be on getting them strong, getting them injury-proof, and just building an aerobic base. And that's going to be much easier to do with non-eccentrically loaded, non-impact based modalities. And so an example of that, let's just say we have someone who's working out once a day. That's all they have time for. And they're going to be doing strength work twice a week. They're going to be training in the morning before they go to work. And so we'll put the strength training Monday and Thursday. And then these other days, they're going to be doing some sort of very low-intensity aerobic work in a non-impact-based modality. So this could be an airdyne. This could be an elliptical. This could be a swim, bike, and just a walk. So something like that would be perfectly appropriate for a lot of people just starting off. Now, if we're talking about someone who's maybe developed a little bit more, maybe they had already been running a little bit before, but someone who actually needs some running in their programming. Now, for beginners, there are a couple of options, but there are really two things that we don't want to do. And that one is we don't want them to run the day before they're doing strength work, and we don't want them to run on the same day before they do their strength work, because that's going to interfere too much with their ability to perform the strength work, which again needs to be the primary focus for these individuals. So that gives us really two options, and which option is going to work best is going to depend on a lot of things: people's schedules, just what makes them feel good. And so one option is to include running on the same day as the strength training, but after the strength work. And it can be done essentially in the same session or at a later point in the day if they have time, an AM and a PM session. So it can be done then, and yes, that will have an impact on their ability to run. They'll be kind of tired for it, so that'll reduce the ability to run there. But for those individuals, it might not matter. It might matter more to have more days of rest, or active rest at least, so non-impact based modalities. Rest on their joints, essentially. So again, if we're keeping this, and I don't know why I erased that, but non-eccentrically loaded modalities, some people are going to feel better doing this because their joints are going to get more days of rest. Even though it's going to be more stress on their joints on these 2 days, they're going to have more time to recover from those 2 days. And so some people are going to do well with that. Some people are not going to do as well with that. And if they're really trying to get a little bit more out of their running performance, that might not be an ideal arrangement. But what you can do is you can incorporate the running the day after the strength work. Again, yes, the strength training the day before, there might be some residual soreness that's going to interfere with the running, but again, it's not going to be too significant, and it's not going to be incredibly important for these individuals. And that is going to reduce the stress on the individual days, but it's also going to allow for some recovery with these non-eccentrically loaded, non-impact based modalities. So they get a day here, then they get 2 days there. And so that's going to give them some rest. It's going to allow them to be a little bit more recovered for their running. And it's going to keep it to 1 session per day, and those sessions are going to be able to be a little bit shorter than if you're incorporating the strength work and the running on the same day. So that's a good way to look at it as well. Now, if we're dealing with advanced runners, people who are actually competing in some sort of distance running, we're talking about people who are very efficient in running. We're talking about people who are already highly adapted to the stress of running. And we're also talking about people for whom running is the primary objective, performance in running. So the strength training is not going to play as big of a role for those individuals as it is for beginners. It's not as important. It's meant to supplement the running. So a lot of those individuals are going to need to run a lot, and they probably already are running 6 to 7 days a week and possibly doing multiple runs in a day. So I'm going to break this down into AM and PM sessions. Now, in terms of how to incorporate the strength work throughout the week, again, I'm going to go with 2 days of strength work per week. Now, where those are placed, there's a little bit more leeway for advanced runners because, again, it's not the primary objective, and the running isn't going to interfere with that as much because they're more adapted to it. It's relative, to their ability level. It's much less of a stress than it would be for a beginner. So, again, we're going to use Monday and Thursday as an example. Strength training here in the PM, and they're going to run there. And they're going to run here. Now, those could potentially be flip-flopped, especially depending on the time of year, where they are in relation to a competitive season or whatever race they may be competing in. If it's really early on in the off-season, you might want to flip those around. If there are some areas that really need to be worked on through the strength training, it might be best to have the strength training in the AM, just so they're a little bit better recovered for that. But then, yeah, as you progress more and more towards the race, the running is obviously going to be more of a focus, and so that should come early, first in the day. Now, not all runners are going to be able to accumulate a ton of volume with running. Again, we have to be cognizant of overuse, and I covered this in last episode. Runners in general are going to be prone to overuse. For beginners, it's going to be because they didn't work into it slowly enough. It might be because they're overweight. It's just because they're not adapted to the stress of running. Now, for advanced runners, if there are overuse problems, it might be due to some muscular imbalances and things like that, but it's also probably due to just an extremely high volume of running. And so you don't want to just run people into the ground. So we have to be cognizant of that. And if we can accumulate volume in some other modalities, that's going to be a huge benefit. So let's just say running is done every morning. And again, this would be a very advanced runner, someone who can actually run every day of the week and who doesn't have any issue with that. They're not experiencing any overuse from running once a day, 7 days a week. And granted, not all of those would be super long runs or anything like that. I might get a little bit into what that would look like, how those runs would vary from one another. But for right now, I'm just going to leave it at that. Now, in the PM sessions, they wouldn't necessarily have to do PM sessions, but if they do, you can incorporate some sort of non-eccentrically loaded modality. You could also, again, flip-flop those. I mean, if you're doing an airdyne early in the day, it's not going to interfere that much as long as you're doing it nice and easy. It's not going to interfere that much with a run in the evening. But just for this example, all the running is going to be done in the morning. And so there might be an airdyne here. This might be a swim. This might be a hike. This might be a bike. And this might be an elliptical. All right. So this allows them to accumulate some more volume of aerobic work without a whole lot of stress on their joints. Now, another thing that we want to consider is, potentially tacking on some conditioning work onto the end of their strength training sessions. Now, it wouldn't be a whole lot, and it would be low intensity, but it would be focusing, again, primarily on these non-eccentrically loaded modalities, these cyclical modalities, and probably incorporating some other things as well, potentially, holds of various kinds. Just it's an opportunity to work in some extra assistance work. So again, front leaning rest, different kinds of carries, overhead carries, farmers carries, things like that. And we also want to think about, maybe incorporating some modalities that are very different from running. So running is, hip extension. We want to think about potentially incorporating something like a ski erg that involves hip flexion. We want to think about rowing that involves a lot of bending. And last time, I talked about how bending is such an important thing for runners to actually be including in their strength work. Now, rowing isn't something you'd probably want to throw in right away because they might not understand how to bend very well early on. That their bending mechanics might not be good, but once they've developed that through the strength training, you can start incorporating some rowing. And you can incorporate that. You can have a row, front leaning rest, ski erg, one arm farmer's walk. Just a circuit of those things, do it at a nice low intensity for, say, 30 minutes. And so that's an opportunity to get in a little bit more conditioning. Again, it's not going to be too hard on the joints, and it's going to get some extra work on areas that need to be worked on. So that's a possibility as well. Again, these things can be potentially flip-flopped because these cyclical modalities aren't going to interfere a whole lot with the running. And in terms of what those might look like, if we're talking about this might be, sorry, wrong day. Let's say Saturday, since a lot of people have more time on the weekend, instead of 2 sessions, this could potentially be one long run. Right? Could be a long run there. On these the strength work days, this could potentially be some sort of shorter aerobic intervals. So let's say I'm map 1 to map 3. Somewhere in there. And I'm not going to get too much into, actually, I'm not going to get at all into the map, the different map levels at this point. If you want to learn more about that stuff, that's OPEX Fitness's thing. And so you can go to their website, OPEXFit, or opexfitness.com, and check that out. And this stuff could be, a little bit higher in intensity. That could be, map, 4 through 6. This could be, map 7 to 10. Somewhere in there. Most of these cyclical modalities would be better off done as a map 10. So nice low intensity. It's more, almost active rest. And it's not going to interfere much with the running. It's not going to interfere with the strength training, but it's getting in just some extra volume of aerobic work. It's increasing blood flow. And so that would be a pretty good layout. This over here, that could be a long map 10 session, or that could potentially also be a time trial. You might not want to do that every week, but that could be, every couple of weeks, every, depending on the person's level, 2 to 4 weeks, maybe even longer between that, but that could potentially be a time trial. And again, just kind of, map 4 to 6, map 10, etc. Just getting some variation there in terms of intensity, but trying to keep it aerobic since we're talking about distance running. Now, if you're working up to a race and you're getting closer and closer, incorporating some higher intensity runs in there could be helpful as well, some anaerobic stuff. But yeah, so that's just to give an example of just a kind of a general program design. And I'm not going to get into intermediate runners because that can honestly go either way. That's a hard group to address because with intermediate runners, there's going to be such a huge variation in terms of ability level, experience, resilience, age, all those sorts of things that are going to play into programming, that there's going to be a huge variety in terms of what a program looks like. For more advanced athletes, that can get pretty specific as well, but it's going to be, obviously a lot of volume. Strength work is going to be less of a priority. For beginners, strength work is always going to be the priority. And there might not be any running. There might be some. And so as always, all this stuff is extremely individual, and none of this stuff is meant to be copied and pasted. This was just covering some general principles. If you really want someone to take all the thinking out of this stuff for you and to design a program for you that is completely individualized and based off of a thorough and comprehensive, no pun intended, assessment. Feel free to contact us at comprehensivestrength.com. We've got a contact page on there. You can email me directly at jonathan@comprehensivestrength.com. And we'll see you next time.